Hello, and welcome to Challenging Silence, a podcast by Women's Health in Women's Hands Community Health Center.
We are back again to have much needed discussions about topics related to female genital mutilation or cutting with survivors, advocates, and community members.
We're your hosts, Tamilola
and Sauda.
Challenging Silence is brought to you by the Flourish Project, made possible through funding from Women in Gender Equality Canada. You can listen to this podcast series on all major podcast listening platforms and our website, flourishaccess.ca.
Please note that this podcast covers topics of sensitive nature, including domestic abuse and violence. To ensure privacy and safety, some guests have chosen to remain anonymous. This podcast is age appropriate for 16 plus. Hello, and welcome to another episode. We are once again bringing something different to our listeners. Creativity and advocacy is often used by many to gain the attention of local media, spread a story or cause to a wider audience, and strengthening community movement toward an identified goal. Some common examples include artwork, poetry, giant sculptures with powerful meaning, such as a 24-foot-tall Afro hair pig sculpture by artist Hank Willis Thomas, placed in Lafayette Square in New Orleans to help foster radical and political awareness and activism, murals that were commonly made in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. In this episode, we will be exploring creative outlets in the form of art, literature, music, and filmmaking as a means for survivors and advocates to break the silence and bring attention to FGMC eradication and survivor support. In a TED Talk about how to end FGM in our lifetime, Julia Lalia Maharaj, the founder of the Orchid Project, pointed out that, or else people understand that they have a human right to access things, you can't embed change. One way to do so at people's comfort level of understanding was through song, dance, drama, and conversation.
In our research, we first landed on Sini Sanuman, which means health tomorrow in the local Bambara language in Mali, West Africa. Sini Sanuman is an organization founded in 2002 by Malians who were involved in the pledge against excision based in the capital city of Bamako. We found that Sini Sanuman and the community members they work with have utilized various creative platforms in Mali to educate people about FGMC prevention. For example, with a 2001 grant from the Canadian Centre for International Cooperation and Study, the organization's executive director, Susan McLucas, with the help of well-known Mali musicians, produced an album called Stop Excision, which contains 8 songs about FGMC and 4 songs about women's rights in 5 local languages. The songs were played by local radio stations, and the most popular song, I Abandon, has a music video that has been played over 6,000 times to date. Sini Sanuman also utilized the power of images for those who can't read or write by creating posters to convey the violence of the act of FGMC in Mali. The use of images and music got people talking about FGMC in Bamako and continues to make a positive impact through pledges against excision and empowering excisors to abandon their practice.
In 1989, Joy Walker, the founder of Women Issues Communication Service Agency, created a traveling museum of paintings and sculptures to fight FGM in Nigeria. Various Nigerian artists submitted different artworks to the theme of female genital mutilation, the suffering, the sorrow, the setback. The first exhibit opened in Lagos in 1989. The artworks had traveled to various parliaments in Europe by 2002 and exhibited showed in selected United States universities in 2006. The exhibits have made a significant contribution to the ongoing fight against FGM and shed light on the situation of survivors and those who are at risk.
In Belgium, there's GAMS Belgium, which was founded in 1996 by Kadidatu Diallo, with GAMS standing for Group for the Abolition of Female Genital Mutilation. GAMS coordinates the network of concerted strategies for fighting against female genital mutilation and is one of the co-founders of the End FGM Europe network. Their take on creative advocacy comes from their hashtag Meet Your Click campaign to celebrate the 2022 International Day of Zero Tolerance to Female Genital Mutilation. This campaign turned the spotlight on the clitoris by using a giant 5-meter tall clitoris that stood on the Place de la Manoir, which is a major square in central Brussels. Equipped with stickers, the GAMS team encouraged those who passed the giant inflatable structure to take a picture with it and post it on social media. This creative advocacy aimed to educate all women about a little known part of their body and raise awareness of the work done by GAMS to protect girls at risk and support survivors of FGMC.
In the UK, the Vavengers is a survivor-led organization standing with and for every woman affected by FGMC and other forms of violence against women and girls. The Vavengers began as an arts collective, bringing together artists, activists, and survivors to unite against the cause through events and creating open spaces where art and creative expression could engage and educate people and spark conversations. They have built a community of visual artists, musicians, and poets who use their craft to tell stories of women, girls, and inequality, their work exuding both reality and hope.
Podcasting is another creative outlet to raise awareness for a cause. Just like what we are doing with the Challenging Silence podcast, the End FGM European Network and some of their partners created the Purple Chair podcast in 2020. In collaboration with the network's youth ambassadors, the aim of the Purple Chair podcast was to build the capacities and skills of a team of young women from FGM impacted diaspora communities across Europe. They use this platform to amplify and empower youth voices and promote youth social entrepreneurship, as well as the increasing use of digital tools among young activists engaged in FGM. The podcast features 10 young activists and 9 episodes with conversations about taboo topics.
In Canada, the End FGM Canada network introduced Miss Clitty, a sassy, no-nonsense clarist that speaks the truth about female reproductive anatomy and FGMC. The End FGM Canada network is a non-partisan group of individuals and organizations working to end female genital mutilation or cutting and support survivors both in Canada and abroad. Similar to Meet Your Clit, Miss Clitty aims to help spark conversations about the clitoris, breaking down barriers around sensitivities of this topic, change hearts and minds, and demystify the clitoris, and remove the shame and stigma often associated with it. The Miss Clitty campaign includes an easy cut and sew design for individuals to make their own dolls, coloring sheets, and printable posters. You can visit endfgm.ca to print the coloring sheets and the design pattern to make your own Miss Clitty doll. When you do, don't forget to share and tag End FGM Canada Network on social media.
Joining us to speak more about creative advocacy is Miriam. She is a former board member of the End FGM Canada Network and one of the creators of Miss Clitty, and she's here to provide us more details about it. Welcome, Miriam, and please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Thank you very much, Tammy, for having me. My name is Marian Abdelkader. I am from Kenya. I have been in Canada for the last 4 years, and I am a survivor of female genital mutilation. And my identity is not just a survivor. I've been a survivor, yes, but I became an educator, an advocate, a researcher in this field because I would want it to end with me. So this is basically a field that I have taken to be my personal endeavor. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak about something that I consider to be my personal calling.
Thank you, Marian, for joining us, and we really appreciate you being here today. The first question I have for you is, can you tell us about the birth story of the Miss Clitty doll, and what was the inspiration behind the idea, and how the process was brought to life?
Yeah, Miss Clitty is a global ambassador, and Miss Clitty is a doll or a friend or a hat that you can use to start questioning stereotypes. And the idea behind it was just basically the fact that it is even so difficult to name the parts of the female genitalia that are cut in FGM. We keep saying FGM, we keep saying FGMC, we keep saying external female genitalia. These have just become buzzwords, have become the elephant in the room. But when you actually mention and say it's the clitoris that is cut, or you even go down to a community like I come from the Somali and we call it the kintir. And when I say kintir, there's an ouch around it. And unless we are able to really talk about these organs, I don't think we are able to like talk about saving them or defending, the importance of these organs. So the whole idea was basically to normalize being able to talk about the female genitalia. In many communities, the female genitalia is shamed. The female genitalia is considered somewhere you don't mention, like, you say down there. It's easy for us to say, like the reproductive organ, but saying something like vagina, clitoris, like it's just so hard. And even medically, if you look the number of researches on, for example, penis or the male organs is much more. Like you see, there's this generally some sort of like sidelining and silencing and really not being comfortable to talk about. So Giselle and myself, being the co-chairs of the End FGM network, then had a conversation. Sometimes back, I would say like 2 years back, 2.5 years, because the idea began and before it was crafted, there was a couple of like thinking around it. So I had a short video on my social media and I said, let's stop cutting the kinter and let's love our girls and love their kinter. And there was an uproar and there was a backlash and I was name called. They always knew there was an ouch around it, there was silence around it, but like there was an outpouring on social media of me and being shamed and castigated. And so that's where this whole idea, like as we were talking and debriefing on all this backlash that I was having, Giselle was like, okay, Kintur is specific to a community. Let's make her a global ambassador. Let's see what the world would say. And that's where Miss Clitty comes in, and because it's encompassing everything that we wanted to be able to talk about. And it's all part of the whole agenda of social norms change, because unless we are able to touch and say and be able to get to the bottom and know the values around it or the stories or the meaning, we won't be going far with this agenda. So in short, it was to normalize. And I remember the very first Miss Clitty was actually designed by a young high school student in Vancouver. And she came up with this nice head of the heart shape. And that's one thing I like, because we want to love the clitoris. It's the essence of love. We need to be able to love and protect it. And so that young girl is the one who first designed, like we had the idea, but she put it like the first vision, the nice, cute, non-threatening doll that we were thinking of. And then it was taken up by another young woman also in her 20s, Sophie, and she developed what we currently have. So there's been a whole like thinking around what it's the image, the message, and the messages around it. The first message was, first of all, to be able to name the clitoris in so many different languages. Kintir, in Somali, for example, Badr, I think in Arabic, Kineme in Swahili. Like we had all these clitoris in English. We had all these different languages. So this was the first. So you have her picture and then all these different names that the clitoris is called. So that people begin to acknowledge this is an organ, important organ that is in the body that has a function. And then all the other messages also diffusing the messages, If, for example, in my community, the clitoris is considered dirty. It's considered it will smell and it will make the girl stink. Those are some of the reasons behind cutting it. So how do we begin now to address these stories around it? Also, like basically like the devil incarnate in many communities, they think it's the clitoris that will make their girls rave mad sexually and become sexually insatiable, which is not true. So the messages around now trying to have messages like, love me, pleasure me, and then with the heart, just something nice that can pull in everyone and make everyone comfortable around to begin these conversations, because it's years and centuries and generations of silence around the clitoris and not being able to say it. So it's not going to be an overnight thing. So this is where Miss Cliti comes in. It's the ambassador to normalize being able to talk about the female organs, the clitoris that is being cut, that is heated, that is chopped off. And we are saying, no, let's leave the clitoris intact. I hope that answers.
Yes, that answers the question. Thank you for providing that insight into the development of Miss Cliti. And there's one great point that you made that I wanted to re-highlight. As you said, if we can't talk about the clitoris, how can we save girls at risk? How can we help survivors reach their optimal women's health? And there is a silence, stigma, and shame that surrounds the female genital organs, and it needs to end. And I know that the Miss Cliti is one way that we're making that change globally.
Yeah, sure. And Miss Cliti can be an ambassador for a lot of other issues now that are related, not just necessarily only FGM, but other related issues. For example, you've really touched on very important, like reproductive health. FGM is an issue that affects women's reproductive health, definitely. And all issue of love and essence, and because if we love our girls enough, we wouldn't want them to be hurt. If we love the clitoris enough and know its function and understand its purpose, we wouldn't be thinking of getting rid of it. I don't think there's anyone who would devalue the eyes and say, yes, let's gouge the eyes out or let's cut the tongue off. But look at what is happening to the clitoris. So this is what we need to be able to do. A lot of education avenues, like being able to be open to understand women's bodies and how they function.
Thank you for sharing such significant information. When Miss Cliti was released, what was the public reception locally in Canada and globally? What impact would you say has made?
Yeah, I think Miss Cliti, like officially, might have been released like a year and a half or a little more than a year and a half ago. And since then, we're all cognizant of the fact that what we are facing is a social norm around the norm of silence around the clitoris, not like shaming them and seeing the clitoris and other, like the labias or even the vagina, like this shameful organ that needs not to be talked about in many communities. We're very intentional about where we want Miss Cliti to go and the goal we have around Miss Cliti being that ambassador that opens up doors and conversations and knowledge and understanding and appreciation and protection and love at the end. But we also know that just like any other social norm, that would take time. So we were not like in a hurry to really like find, oh, what's the reception, what has been the evaluation and all this. But of course, from the release time, we do have information around, like sometimes there was a workshop. I think it was in Ottawa, and the FGM Canada Network was invited and the dolls were brought. And we do have photos of some ministers in Canada and members of parliament taking photos with Miss Cliti. Internationally, I think it has been received much louder maybe than in Canada. the silence is still much more here. Like when we saw Miss Clitty gracing the cover of an international foreign affairs magazine in Sweden, I mean, that says a lot. When here in Canada, we actually still have not yet come to a place where even CBC can make a story about the clitoris and the women genitalia in general, even though they have stories around the male organs, the penis. They so we haven't gotten to a level where the uptake, at home. I think we see a lot of groups outside when they have workshops, women groups. We've seen youth, we've seen people taking Miss Clitty campaign, Miss Clitty dolls, making dolls, like making dolls in Mexico, making dolls back in Kenya, or people coloring, the Miss Clitty drawings that you can get on the website. But we are not so worried about that silence, because social norms do take time and different people at different levels. It's not the same for everyone. In Canada, it's a bit disappointing that generally FGM work is not receiving as much attention and as much support as it should, especially from government, from media, from civil society. And as a person who has been like an ambassador, an advocate in this field for a long time, I was really shocked. Like that was a big shocker for me. Not only is there silence, but even when you bring it up, like it's like people are scattering away and running. They don't even want to talk about it. That was a big shock for me. I'm still yet to come to terms with it. I'm still yet to come to terms with the fact that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did not even make a statement this past International Zero Tolerance Day. That was very disappointing. But as I said, and I'll reiterate, that changing social norms takes time. For as long as we are consistent and we are persistent and we are always there, the information will be taken, however slow. So Miss Clitty will rock that red carpet, will be that ambassador for so many different things. But right now, we're really happy with the reception there is, and it's growing. So it's slow but steady.
It's unfortunate how Canada it's considered like a multicultural country, but there's still this silence of GMC. But however, the Miss Clitty provides hope, especially to different countries. Like you mentioned Mexico, Kenya, and different countries, and having these discussions about FGMC.
Yeah, it's very disappointing, but I always say, let's just drop 4 excuses. The excuse of thinking you're interfering with people's culture, the excuse of thinking you are imposing your own culture or you're being racist or colonial. Nobody thinks about those 4 things when we talk, for example, of beating, like children, which is violence. There are people who have the norm of thinking that's how they discipline their children. Nobody has ever given them any room, any excuse to say, oh, but we might be interfering with it. No, we all know and accept it is wrong. Imagine cutting girls' organs is getting all this silence.
And would you have any advice or words of encouragement to the youth who are or want to use art and creativity in advocating for gender equality, human rights, and ending gender-based violence? We know that there are youth in Canada and in other diaspora communities who also want to speak out against gender-based violence and FGMC because they know it's still happening to their communities in their country of origin. So what words of advice would you give when they want to use creativity for this advocacy?
Creativity is very, very, very crucial, especially in this advocacy and of wanting to end female genital mutilation. It's a very hard, very challenging topic. Like it's such a bad thing that any human being should be able to just see it and not just it should just end here and now. But again, we know there are chains, there are norms, there are stories that keep feeding and keep making people believe that it is quote unquote the thing to do. So we need creativity, we need humor. When people are in a room and there's humor and they are relaxed, that is when people's true feelings even come to the fore. Like if you really wanted to know what they were thinking or what they were planning or what they could do, or that's a point at which you can actually catch people. So creativity is needed, and to be honest, even with Miss Cliti campaign, the End FGM Canada Network is open to have volunteers. Let them bring their creativity to the board. We need stories that counter the stories that are there now. We need the humor that really speaks about the importance of protecting girls from GMC. We need to start breaking this wall of silence chip by chip, brick by brick. And I think creativity and art is one way. There are so many other ways, but it is also one very important way. So I would encourage them to be able to get up and really be part of this whole agenda and bring their creativity to the table.
Thank you for that. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion about creative advocacy. We really, really appreciate the insight that you've provided, not just about the creation of Miss Cliti and the strides that the doll has made globally, but also the advice you've given regarding how we can't stop with the advocacy and encouraging survivors and protecting girls at risk. It doesn't end until we are in a society where people can openly talk about the clitoris and openly stand and say that we should not be cutting the clitoris. It is a normal part of the female body, and every girl deserves to live her life without any trauma of experiencing FGMC. So thank you once again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate taking time with you guys on this topic.
From our search for creative outlets and our discussion with this episode's guests, here are a few things we have learned. Working closely with local allies will allow for great access to the communities you are trying to reach. And when we do so, bring your ideas and make suggestions, but let the community or locals take it from there. Try to get famous local people on board in the advocacy work and use music as it is easy to disseminate widely and catchy enough for people to remember the message long term. When it comes to FGMC, you can't just tell people to stop the practice and expect an immediate change. Instead, creating educational programs that allow people to explore, learn, and share knowledge that provides the people with the choice is more effective and long-lasting.